April 15th, 1863. Dear Diary, tonight. I wrote 2 letters, one to resign as President of these United States, the other, I pray I'll never have to send. The candlelight flickers as I write these words, and perhaps it's fitting. Everything feels uncertain, wavering like this flame before me. But what happened in that cabinet meeting today? I'm not sure I can carry this burden anymore. The war has been raging for 2 years now. 2 years of watching young men march off to die for a cause I still believe in, yet question every single night. Mary found me in the study this morning, staring at the casualty reports from Chancellorsville. Abraham, she whispered, her voice already knowing the weight of the numbers I was reading. How many this time? I couldn't answer. How do you tell your wife that 1,700 Union soldiers will never return home? How do you explain that Hooker's perfect plan crumbled like autumn leaves, and Lee, brilliant, devastating Lee, had outmaneuvered us once again? Every father reading this knows the feeling, that moment when you realize you might have failed those depending on you. April 16th, 1863. The nightmare was the same again. Young Willie calling for his papa, asking why I let him die. But this time he wasn't alone. Hundreds of boys in Union blue stood behind him, all asking the same question. Why, Mr. President? Why did you let us die? I woke screaming Mary's name. She held me until the trembling stopped, but we both knew sleep wouldn't return. At 3 a.m., I walked to the window overlooking the Potomac. Somewhere out there, Confederate campfires dotted the Virginia landscape. So close. They could be at our doorstep within days. That's when I heard the footsteps in the hallway. Someone was coming to my private quarters, someone who shouldn't be there. Secretary Stanton appeared in my doorway, his face grave in the moonlight. Mr. President, forgive the intrusion, but there's been a development. A telegram from General Grant. My heart stopped. Grant was our last hope in the West. If Vicksburg had fallen to the Confederates... Sir, Stanton continued, his voice barely above a whisper, Grant requests immediate reinforcements. Without them, he says the siege cannot continue. I felt the walls of the room closing in. We had no reinforcements to send. Every available man was already committed, already bleeding, already dying. I thought of the letter in my desk drawer, the resignation letter I'd written just hours before. But then Stanton said something that changed everything. There's more, sir. The telegram has a second part you need to hear. April 17th, 1863. Dear Diary, I must record exactly what Grant wrote, because someday when this war is over, if it ever ends, historians will want to know the truth. Mr. President, the men are hungry, outnumbered, and far from home. But yesterday, something extraordinary happened. A group of escaped slaves arrived at our lines. When they learned who we were fighting for, an old man named Samuel spoke for all of them. General, we've been praying for you. We've been praying that you and President Lincoln don't give up on us. We're ready to fight too. We're ready to die free rather than live in chains. I thought you should know, sir, that your war, our war, means more than strategic victories. It means hope to people who have never known it. I wept. Right there in front of Stanton, I wept like a child. Not from despair this time, but from a strange mixture of humility and renewed purpose. The resignation letter still sits in my drawer, but tonight I wrote a different letter. To Grant. To promise him the reinforcements he needs, even if it means stripping defenses from Washington itself. Because what I discovered next changed my understanding of this entire war. April 18th, 1863. Mary knocked on my study door this morning. Abraham, there are visitors here to see you. They walked through Confederate lines to get here. I expected military officers or politicians. Instead, 3 figures stood in my office. Samuel, the elderly former slave Grant had mentioned, along with a young woman clutching a baby, and a teenage boy whose eyes held the weight of someone far older. Samuel spoke first. Mr. President, we heard tell you might be thinking about quitting. Folks down south, they celebrating, saying Lincoln gonna give up soon. The young woman stepped forward. "Sir, this here is my baby, Abraham. Named him after you before he was even born, 'cause you gave us hope when we ain't had none." I looked at that child, barely 6 months old, born into a world torn apart by war, yet his mother had named him Abraham. The weight of that trust, that faith in a man they'd never met, overwhelmed me. But it was the teenager's words that shattered every doubt I'd harbored. The boy, Marcus, spoke quietly. "My daddy died running for freedom, Mr. President. Died with your name on his lips, believing you was going to free us all. Now I hear folks saying you might quit." He paused, looking directly into my eyes. "Sir, if you quit, my daddy died for nothing, and I ain't ready to go back to being property." The resignation letter. I walked to my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled it out. All 4 of us stared at the document that could have changed the course of American history. Then I did something that surprised even myself. I handed the letter to Samuel. "Would you read this aloud?" I asked. Samuel's weathered hands shook as he read my words of defeat, my catalog of failures, my intention to step down and let someone else carry the burden of war. When he finished, the room fell silent. "Mr. President," Samuel said finally, "you wrote this letter when you was thinking about all the dying, but you wasn't thinking about all the living. You wasn't thinking about this baby here, or about millions like us who see you as Moses himself. What happened next will stay with me forever." Marcus, the teenager, walked to my fireplace. "Mr. President, sir, could you light a fire?" Puzzled, I struck a match and lit the kindling. As the flames grew, Marcus looked at me with an expression of startling maturity. "Could you burn that letter, sir? Could you burn it so we can all watch it turn to nothing, like the fears that made you write it?" I held the resignation letter over the flames. For a moment, I hesitated. The easy path, the escape from this crushing responsibility, was right there in my hands. But then I saw little Abraham sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. I saw Samuel's eyes, filled with the kind of hope that can sustain a person through decades of suffering. I saw Marcus, barely 16, carrying the dreams of his dead father. The letter caught fire. As it burned, Samuel began to sing, a low, haunting spiritual I'd never heard before. Mary appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, and joined her voice to his. The young mother hummed along, swaying with her baby. But as the last pieces of my resignation turned to ash, I realized something that would guide every decision I made for the rest of this war. April 19th, 1863. Dear Diary, I understand now. This war isn't about preserving the Union as I once thought. It's not even about freeing the slaves, as noble as that cause is. This war's about proving that a nation founded on the idea that all men are created equal can actually live up to those words. Not just speak them, not just write them in pretty documents, but live them, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The weight is still crushing. The casualties still haunt my dreams. The political pressure still threatens to tear apart everything we're fighting for. But I also know this. If we quit now, if we let the Union dissolve, if we allow slavery to continue, then no one anywhere in the world will ever again believe that democracy can work. They'll point to America and say, "See, it was a nice idea, but when tested, it failed. I cannot, I will not let that happen. Grant will get his reinforcements. I'll strip Washington's defenses if necessary. And when this war ends, not if, but when, it will end with every child in America, regardless of color, having the chance to dream the same dreams as little Abraham sleeping in his mother's arms." The resignation letter is ash now. In its place, I'm writing something new, a recommitment not just to victory, but to the kind of nation we must become to deserve victory. Tomorrow, I meet with the cabinet to discuss the Emancipation Proclamation's expansion. The war that was meant to preserve the Union will become the war that redefines it. Some nights, I still dream of Willie asking why I let him die. But now, more often, I dream of children like little Abraham, asking not why I failed, but thanking me for not giving up on their future. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There's more to that night I almost quit, something I haven't told you yet. April 20th, 1863, late night. Dear Diary, after Samuel, Marcus, and the young mother left yesterday, I thought the crisis had passed. I was wrong. As I prepared for bed, Mary entered my study with an expression I'd learned to fear, the look she wore when she discovered something I'd tried to hide. Abraham, she said quietly, closing the door behind her, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. She held up a piece of paper, not my resignation letter, which we'd burned, but something else. My blood ran cold as I recognized my own handwriting. Is this your will, Abraham? Did you write your last testament the same night you wrote that resignation? I couldn't speak? Yes, I had written my will. In my darkest moment, contemplating not just leaving the presidency, but other permanent solutions to the unbearable weight I carried. The will was my insurance that Mary and Tad would be cared for if I chose the unthinkable. Mary's eyes filled with tears as she read my confession in silence. You weren't just planning to quit, were you? You were planning to... Mary, please. I reached for her hand, but she stepped back. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch the man you love disappear a little more each day? To see him smile at strangers while dying inside? Abraham, I've been terrified for months that I'd wake up one morning and... She couldn't finish the sentence. Neither could I. That's when we heard the commotion outside, horses galloping, urgent voices, someone pounding on the White House doors at nearly midnight. Secretary Hay burst into the study without knocking, his face flushed from running. Mr. President, Mrs. Lincoln, forgive the intrusion, but there's an urgent telegram from Richmond, the Confederate capital. My heart pounded as Hay handed me the yellow paper with trembling hands. Sir, it's from Jefferson Davis himself. I read the telegram aloud, my voice barely steady. To President Lincoln, through channels, I have learned of your contemplation to abdicate your position. Before you decide, we should speak. There are matters of mutual concern that transcend our current conflict. A private meeting can be arranged through intermediaries. The future of both our nations may depend on this conversation. Jefferson Davis, President, Confederate States of America. The room fell silent. Mary stared at me in shock. Abraham, how could Davis know about your resignation letter? We burned it just yesterday. The horrible truth hit me like a physical blow. Someone had been reading my diary. Someone had been reporting my private thoughts to the Confederacy. Hey, I said, my voice sharp with sudden authority, who else knew about my contemplation of resignation? Only your cabinet members present at yesterday's meeting, sir. Secretary Stanton, Secretary Seward, Secretary Chase. And who delivered this telegram? Hay's face went pale. It came through our usual channels, sir, but he paused, clearly reluctant to continue. But what, John? But it was hand-delivered by someone claiming to be a Union courier. Someone who seemed to know his way around the White House very well. Someone who knew exactly which door to use, exactly whom to ask for. The implications crashed over me like a wave. Not only was there a spy in my inner circle, but that spy had been reading my most private thoughts, my moments of deepest vulnerability, and reporting them to Jefferson Davis himself. Mary sank into a chair, the weight of realization visible on her face. Abraham, if they know about your darkest moments, what else do they know? Our military plans? Your meetings with the generals? I began pacing, my mind racing through every conversation, every document, every person who had access to my private quarters. The diary sat on my desk, suddenly feeling like a weapon pointed at my own heart. April 21st, 1863. Dear Diary, I write this entry knowing it might be read by enemy eyes, but I must continue documenting these events. If I am to be betrayed by my own words, then let those words at least tell the complete truth. I didn't sleep last night. Instead, I sat by my window, watching the shadows move across the White House lawn, wondering which of my trusted advisors was a traitor. By dawn, I had made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days before. I was going to meet with Jefferson Davis, not because I was considering surrender or negotiation from weakness, but because I needed to understand how deeply the Confederacy had penetrated our government. And perhaps, if I was clever enough, I could use this meeting to feed false information back through their spy network. But first, I had to set a trap. At breakfast, I casually mentioned to Mary, loudly enough for the household staff to hear, that I was planning to review troop movements to Gettysburg in my study that afternoon. It was a lie, but if our spy was listening, I wanted them to hear it. Then I called an emergency cabinet meeting. "Gentlemen," I announced as they assembled, "we have a problem." A serious problem. Secretary Stanton's face was immediately concerned. "What kind of problem, Mr. President?" "The kind where someone in this room is a Confederate spy." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched each face carefully, Stanton's shock, Seward's indignation, Chase's nervous adjustment of his spectacles. "That's a serious accusation," Seward said finally. "What evidence do you have?" I told them about Davis's telegram, about the impossibly detailed knowledge of my private moments. As I spoke, I watched for tells, nervous glances, fidgeting hands, the subtle signs of guilt I'd learned to read during my years as a lawyer. "Here's what we're going to do," I continued. "Each of you will receive a different piece of false intelligence about our military operations. If any of this information reaches Confederate forces, we'll know who our traitor is." Secretary Chase cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. President, with respect, this approach seems suspicious of all of us. Surely there are other ways to—" "Salmon," I interrupted, "there are no other ways. Someone with access to this room, to my private thoughts, is feeding information to Davis. Until we identify that person, every military operation, every strategic decision, every life we put at risk is potentially compromised." The weight of command settled over me again, but this time it felt different. Not the crushing despair I'd felt just days before, but a cold, calculating determination. Someone had violated my trust, had read my darkest thoughts, and used them as weapons. That betrayal had awakened something in me, not just as president, but as a man defending his family and his cause. That afternoon, I implemented my plan. To Stanton, I revealed fake troop movements toward Baltimore. To Seward, fictitious negotiations with European powers. To Chase, imaginary financial arrangements with Union sympathizers in the South. Each piece of false intelligence was carefully crafted to seem believable, yet distinctive enough that I'd know exactly which secretary had betrayed us if the information surfaced in Confederate hands. But what I discovered that evening changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty and betrayal. April 22nd, 1863. Dear Diary, the spy revealed himself, but not in the way I expected. I was working late in my study, deliberately writing false information about a planned attack on Richmond when I heard a soft knock at my door. I quickly covered my writing and called, "Come in." It was Tad, my youngest son, holding his favorite wooden toy soldier. "Papa, I can't sleep. Can I sit with you while you work? How could I refuse?" Tad climbed into the chair beside my desk, playing quietly with his soldier while I pretended to review documents. But as I watched him, something nagged at the back of my mind, a memory, a detail I'd overlooked. "Tad," I said carefully, "when you play in the hallways, do you ever hear grown-ups talking about Papa's work?" He nodded enthusiastically. "Oh yes, Papa. Sometimes I hear Mr. Stanton talking very loud about soldiers, and sometimes I hear the nice man who brings you letters talking to other people about what you write in your book." My blood turned to ice. "What nice man, Tad?" "What book?" "The nice man who cleans your office at night. He's very quiet, but sometimes I see him reading your special book when I can't sleep and I walk around." The janitor. Not one of my cabinet members, but someone so invisible, so trusted with access to every room, every document, every private moment that we never considered him a threat. "Tad, this is very important. Does this man ever take papers with him when he leaves? Sometimes, but he always brings them back the next morning. I thought maybe he was being helpful, like when I helped Mama organize her letters. I pulled Tad close, trying to keep my voice calm. Can you describe this man to me? As Tad described the janitor, a thin, quiet man with gentle eyes who always smiled at him in the hallways, I realized how perfectly positioned this spy had been. Access to every conversation, every document, every private moment. He'd been reading my diary for months, possibly since the beginning of my presidency. I had to act immediately, but carefully. If I confronted the janitor directly, he might escape and take valuable intelligence with him. Instead, I needed to catch him in the act. Tad, I need you to do something very important for Papa. Can you go to your room and stay there until morning? Don't come out, no matter what you hear. After Tad left, I quickly wrote a fake diary entry describing a fictional meeting with General Grant scheduled for the next morning, complete with detailed military plans that would seem irresistible to Confederate intelligence. Then, I pretended to retire to my bedroom, leaving the diary conspicuously open on my desk. But instead of sleeping, I hid in the small alcove behind my office bookshelf and waited. The hours crawled by. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock, then 2. I began to wonder if my trap had failed, if somehow the spy had detected my suspicion. Then, at nearly 3 in the morning, I heard it, the soft sound of my office door opening. A figure moved silently through the darkness, lit only by the dying embers in my fireplace. The janitor, just as Tad had described, thin, careful, moving with the practiced stealth of someone who had done this many times before. I watched as he approached my desk, carefully lifted my diary, and began copying the false information I had written. His handwriting was swift and precise, the work of a trained intelligence operative, not a simple cleaning man. I stepped out of the shadows. "Good evening, Mr." The man spun around, his face a mask of shock and fear. In his hand, he still held my diary and his hastily scrawled notes. "Mr. President, I was just copying my private diary entries to send to Jefferson Davis." I kept my voice calm, authoritative. "Yes, I know exactly what you were doing." The man's shoulders sagged in defeat. "How long have you known?" "Not long enough, apparently." "Tell me, how many of my entries have you shared with Richmond?" He looked at me with something almost like respect. "Most of them, sir." "Your doubts, your fears, your military concerns? President Davis has been very interested in your emotional state." "I see. And the telegram? The offer to meet? That was based on my moment of weakness, my consideration of resignation?" "Yes, sir. President Davis believed that if he could speak with you directly, during your period of doubt, he might convince you that continued war serves neither of our peoples." The audacity was breathtaking. Davis had read my most private thoughts and concluded that I was weak, that I could be manipulated through my compassion and self-doubt. He'd seen my humanity and mistaken it for weakness. "Well then," I said, settling into my chair, "I suppose we should arrange that meeting." The spy's eyes widened. "Sir?" "Oh yes, I'm going to meet with Jefferson Davis, but not for the reasons he expects. You see, your intelligence gathering has been very helpful, but it's told Davis exactly what I wanted him to know." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out several pages of my real diary entries. Entries I'd hidden from the spy. Entries that told a very different story than the ones he'd been copying. "These are the entries you never saw," I explained. "The ones where I documented my growing resolve, my strategic planning, my coordination with Grant and Sherman on campaigns your president knows nothing about." The man's face went pale as he realized the implications. "You've been feeding Davis carefully selected intelligence, showing him my moments of doubt while hiding my moments of strength." Now he believes he's dealing with a broken man who might be willing to negotiate. He has no idea that I've been playing a longer game all along. But that's when the spy said something that made me realize this conspiracy went deeper than I'd imagined. "Mr. President," the man said quietly, "you don't understand. I'm not the only one. There are others, and they're positioned much closer to you than a simple janitor. The meeting with Davis, it's not just about negotiation, it's about something much more permanent." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "They know about your will, sir. They know you've contemplated ending things yourself. The meeting is designed to push you over that edge, to make you believe that your death would serve the greater good, would end the war, and save lives." The full scope of the Confederate strategy became clear. They weren't just trying to gather intelligence or negotiate a peace treaty. They were trying to drive me to suicide. Davis had read my diary entries about Willie's death, about my crushing guilt over the war's casualties, about my darkest moments of despair. He'd crafted a psychological warfare campaign designed to convince me that my death would be the ultimate act of presidential sacrifice. "The others you mentioned," I said carefully, "how close are they?" The spy hesitated, then made what appeared to be a final decision. "Closer than you can imagine, sir. One of them has been reporting not just on your actions, but on your family, on Mrs. Lincoln's activities, on young Tad's routines." The threat to my family transformed everything. This wasn't just about military intelligence or political maneuvering. This was about the safety of Mary and Tad. "I need names," I said, my voice hard with resolve. "All of them." The spy, whose real name, I learned, was Thomas Mitchell, a former Richmond newspaper editor recruited by Confederate intelligence, gave me everything. A network of 5 operatives embedded throughout the White House staff, each reporting different aspects of our daily operations. But more importantly, he revealed the true purpose of Davis's proposed meeting. It wasn't meant to end in negotiation or assassination. It was meant to end in my voluntary surrender of life itself, presented as a noble sacrifice that would stop the war and save thousands of lives. "They know you, Mr. President," Mitchell explained. "They know your guilt over every casualty, your sense of personal responsibility for every death. The meeting is designed to convince you that your suicide would be seen as such a powerful gesture of peace that it would force both sides to lay down their arms." April 23rd, 1863. Dear Diary, I write these final words of this extraordinary week with a strange mixture of gratitude and determination. Gratitude because the discovery of the spy network has revealed just how deeply our enemies understand both our weaknesses and our strengths. Determination because that same discovery has shown me something crucial about the nature of leadership in wartime. Davis read my diary entries and saw weakness where he should have seen strength. He saw my guilt over casualties and mistook it for instability. He saw my love for Mary and Tad and thought it was a vulnerability he could exploit. But what he failed to understand is that these very human qualities, the capacity for doubt, the weight of responsibility, the deep love for family and fellow citizens, these are not weaknesses in a leader. They are the source of true strength. A man who feels no guilt over sending soldiers to their deaths is a monster. A man who never questions his decisions is a tyrant. A man who doesn't love deeply is incapable of making the sacrifices necessary to protect what he loves. Davis wanted to meet with a broken man he could manipulate into self-destruction. Instead, he'll meet with a man who has looked into the abyss of despair and chosen to keep fighting, not despite his humanity, but because of it. The spy network has been quietly arrested. The false intelligence I planted through my cabinet secretaries has been allowed to proceed, giving us valuable insight into Confederate communications. And yes, I will meet with Jefferson Davis, but on my terms and for my purposes. Tonight, Mary sat with me as I burned the will I'd written during my darkest hour. As the flames consumed those desperate words, she took my hand and said something I'll never forget. Abraham, your strength doesn't come from never falling down. It comes from getting back up every single time, no matter how many times you fall. Little Abraham, that baby named after me, is sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms somewhere tonight. Marcus is probably dreaming of the freedom his father died seeking. Samuel is likely thanking God that his prayers were answered. And I am here, still president, still fighting, still believing that this nation conceived in liberty can indeed endure. The candle burns low as I write these words, but tomorrow I'll light another candle and continue writing. Because that's what leaders do. We keep writing the next chapter, even when we don't know how the story will end. Democracy is not a destination. It's a choice we make again and again, especially in our darkest hours. Tonight, tomorrow, and for all the nights to come, I choose to continue. The war that was meant to preserve the Union will become the war that redefines it. And I will be here to see it through, not because I'm unbreakable, but because I've learned that the most important strength comes from being broken and choosing to heal, choosing to fight, choosing to hope. But the meeting with Jefferson Davis would reveal secrets about the war that I never could have imagined, secrets that would change not just the course of the conflict, but my understanding of what we were really fighting for.